say a word about myself, please, in comparison with the others. I'm not a Buddhist, but I have practiced Zen, been training in Chan, which is the Chinese precursor to Zen, for 30 years. I meditate every day, but mostly I write and work as a psychologist, working on consciousness. I've written many books about consciousness, but I'm here in Amsterdam because of this book, which very confusingly is called The Mystery of Consciousness, when in English it is called 10 Zen Questions. But the English are now changing their mind and changing it from 10 Zen Questions to Zen and the Art of Consciousness. So I hope you're very confused. But that one is me asking questions such as, am I conscious now? What was I conscious of a moment ago? Who's asking the question? Things like that. Now, Alan Wallace. I am baffled by what I heard here tonight. He says that all these materialist scientists believe that consciousness is an emergent phenomenon from the brain. No, some do. Mm-hmm. There are so many different views in philosophy, neuroscience, and psychology about consciousness. The idea that it's an emergent property is only one, not very popular view. Mm-hmm. That it's emergent from the brain is very unpopular because we have now enormous amount of research showing that you need a brain and a body and a world, not just a brain on its own won't do. But there are many others who think it's not an emergent property, it's supervenient on the brain, or the brain and the body, or its identity. Brain activity is identical to experience. We can't see how, just like people couldn't see how water is H2O or heat is radiation. But now we understand it, and one day we'll understand that brain activity is the same. There are so many different views. To lump them all together is quite unfair. He then said that experience, imagery, emotions, and so on are invisible. Running through everything he said there, to me, listening carefully, was a fundamentally dualist view. On the one hand, our experiences and the mind and imagery and emotions, and on the other hand is the physical world of the brain. And one is invisible from the other. We have known for hundreds of years that dualism doesn't work. There are almost no philosophers today alive who are dualists. There are some very subtle forms of dualism that some scientists and some philosophers adhere to. But on the whole, as Dan Dennett says, dualism is forlorn. It's hopeless. It's very tempting, but it doesn't work. But hey, you are interested in Buddhism. In Buddhism, one of the fundamental principles is to realize non-duality, to see through the natural tendency to imagine the world as split into me and the world, or mind and brain. But running through everything that Alan Wallace said there was this matter-experience duality. Is he right that experience is invisible? No, I think not. We have our brain scanners now, fMRI, PET scanners and so on, are very feeble compared to how I expect them to be in 10 years or 20 years, but already we can see thoughts. If somebody is asked to think about a house, you can see where in the brain that something happens. Ask them to think about a face, and it happens in the fusiform face area. Ask them to imagine a pink elephant, you will get activity in V4, the color area of the visual cortex, and in the areas constructing objects. Throw something at them and they catch it, you will see the activity running not through the visual cortex where you recognize objects, but through a separate system, the dorsal stream, that controls actions, visually guided actions, separate from perception. We know all of these things which surely though we can't exactly see what someone is thinking, we can't look into their head in meditation and say, aha, they're in this state, but we can see a lot already. I think it's not a very defensible claim to say that experiences are invisible, or to imply, as he did, that they are intrinsically invisible, we'll never see them. So I disagree with him about that. And I think it was unfair of him to dismiss all scientists and all our endeavours in that way. So, he finds substrate consciousness. I don't know what he means. I am not trained in the Tibetan traditions, and the terms used there are only somewhat familiar to me. But I have been meditating a long time. I have sometimes come to a state of mind in which there no longer seems to be me watching things happen. Time and space seem to have completely changed in such a way that it seems that something like a bottle of water, a table, a thought, kind of emerges apparently out of nowhere, seems to last a while with its own time and shape and space brought with it, as it were, and then sort of goes away again, and other things are happening, and they don't seem to be happening in time or space, but while they're there, they seem to have time. Is this kind of familiar? Then that evokes the question, where are all these coming from? Yes, as he said, it does provoke that question. So if I'm right in thinking it's something like that he's getting at, then I share the experience and the perplexity and the question. What a question! In fact, I've written about this to some extent myself. What a question! How can it be? How weird it seems when the stability of the ordinary world, the assumptions we make about I'm in here looking out and there's a solid, persisting world out there, are gone, and yet still there's something. Where is it coming from? A really interesting, vivid question. But his answer, creating this thing, almost concretizing, making solid this idea of this thing or stuff called substrate consciousness. Those of you who've seen the rest of the video will see that he goes on to say that this substrate consciousness contains all the past lives. It's a great repository of masses and masses of information. You know, we would have to overthrow most of science if this were true. Now, that doesn't mean it's not true. Maybe we do have to overthrow science, but, you know, he's not given me a good reason to want to. This theory is particularly interesting to me because 40 years ago, when I was a young student at Oxford studying physiology and psychology, I had an extraordinary out-of-the-body experience, which kind of turned into like a near-death experience, which kind of turned into a mystical experience, and ultimately experience of oneness, and loss of self and time and space and so on. And that is why I decided to devote my life to parapsychology, which I did for about 20 years, and never found any paranormal phenomena. But I did my PhD. I did my PhD looking for telepathy and clairvoyance because I had a theory. And my theory was exactly the same as Alan Wallace says there, that memory is not stored in the brain, it's stored somewhere out there. I said it was stored in the Akashic record or something like that, or the great field of consciousness. He says it's in the substrate consciousness. In my years of doing my PhD, I discovered two things, important things. One, I couldn't find any evidence for this. And two, this idea was not new to me, as I thought. In fact, it's come up again and again in the history of Eastern philosophy, in Western philosophy, in mystical traditions, in the esoteric traditions, in theosophy, and it always hit problems and had to be abandoned. And I'm afraid that his version probably will too. But we'll see, and I applaud at least the attempt to study experience seriously and try to put it together with some scientific ideas.